Hello and welcome to Culture Over Coffee, a podcast focused on improving company culture and fostering employee engagement. Every week we chat with experts and thought leaders about the latest information and proven practices you can use to reduce regrettable turnover, increase productivity on your team, and retain key customers. So pour a cup of your favorite brew and join us. I'm your host, Beth Sunshine, SVP at Up Your Culture and the Center for Sales Strategy. In this episode, we continue our journey through each of the 4 engagement elevators. Today, we're stepping into elevator number 3, valued voice. In this elevator, employees trust their coworkers and leaders, and they participate in open, two-way communication. They also allow others to talk as they sincerely listen, and in turn, share information and concerns back with others. Helping me explore valued voice is the amazing Lori Clark, Director of Local Sales at TEGNA. Lori has such great insights on how companies with repeated success almost always have one thing in common, a strong company culture. Why being fully transparent as a leader can make it easier for employees to feel as though their voice is valued, and how providing your employees with the truth will always be better than allowing their minds to fill the vacuum. So Lori, thank you so much for joining me today for Culture Over Coffee. This season of our podcast is exploring each of the 4 engagement elevators that we use to help organizations improve culture, help them elevate engagement, which is where that term engagement elevator came from. Today, we're going to focus on the 3rd engagement elevator, which is valued voice. And you should know that during our planning meeting, when we were first discussing this podcast and we were talking about the ideal guests for this episode today, your name came up right away because you have a reputation for building strong teams and establishing really good two-way communication channels where everyone feels heard. So you were hand-selected for this topic. We know it's something you do very naturally, and I'm just really excited that you made time to join us today so we can talk all about this and we can get your perspective on culture and engagement and very specifically establishing an environment where people feel as though their voices are valued. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am too. All right. So I want to start with a very broad question, even though we're going to get more specific soon. I want to start very high level and just ask you, why do you think it's important that companies focus on company culture or employee engagement? What benefits have you seen either for the company itself or for the employees when this is a focus?
I think the importance is really about, repeated success. Like, companies can have success without a strong culture, but the ones that continue to be successful over and over again seem to have a really good, strong culture. And the thing that makes up the culture is, honestly, it's about the people and more specifically, the leaders. So I think that's why it's super important that you have good people, strong leaders, and then the rest of it kind of falls in place.
That makes sense to me. And interesting that you would say it's a repeatable process. If you have a strong culture, you can repeat that success, get it, have it again and again. That's not something I've always, that people always jump to. Very insightful.
Well, and particularly with the last couple of years of things being so uncertain and they change, with COVID, with the war, with, supply issues. By having a good culture, you can work through that together as a team. And that's back to where the employee engagement comes in. You can't work through things without everyone being on board with the plan.
That's a great point. Yeah, so many distractions in our lives, so many things tugging at us that if we don't feel engaged at work, if we're not showing up with our sleeves rolled up, really ready to go, we're not going to reach our full potential or realize all of the things we could accomplish. So I like that. That's something I'll probably borrow from you in the future. So thank you. All right. So getting more specific from the broad to the more narrow, really specifically the valued voice elevator, the key to establishing, I think, a strong valued voice across an organization is ensuring that there's really good two-way communication, two-way being the key word there. So employees need to feel as though their voices are heard and valued, but at the same time, they also need to feel as though they're getting information, that they have all of the information and insight they need to do great work. So I want to break those two things down a little bit, and I'll point to the Engage 2022 report that we recently published. It showed that a surprising number of people, almost 1 in 4, do not feel as though their opinions matter at work. And this actually impacts newer employees even more. I was surprised to see 50% of those employed between 1 and 3 years, so not that new, 1 and 3 years, 50% of them feel as though their opinions do not matter. So I want to ask you, in your experience, what needs to happen for employees to feel valued and heard? And what are the keys you would recommend to creating that kind of environment?
Yeah, I was actually surprised by that statistic too. I was like, wow, 1 in 4, that's a little bit scary. Made me kind of think to myself, okay, so I need to just double back with my team and make sure they're not feeling that way. But I think the way that it's all about it being organic, right? In your everyday conversations, your everyday, one-on-ones or client meeting feedback. I mean, I think it is all about not just saying we want your feedback, but in every moment, taking that opportunity to get their feedback. And then also for you to give your feedback too, right? And none of us are, an exception to needing feedback. We all need feedback, right? So when it becomes a part of what you do every day. Then when there are situations where you hear a lot of times, like people say, oh, my door is always open. Well, what does that mean really? Is it really? But I think people start to feel comfortable and feel like it is really always open if in everyday conversations, that request for their feedback is coming up. And also you giving feedback as well is coming up, being transparent about that. So it's not something I feel like that you can just say, come talk to me if you have a problem. It's more about being aware of what's going on and maybe sometimes even reaching out like, hey, I noticed XYZ. Let's talk through that. Or are you having trouble? Like being a little bit intuitive about what's happening around you and not just as a leader being tunnel visioned to, okay, I've got to check all this stuff off my list of to-dos. I don't have time to check in on so-and-so. I think being intentional and being organic in those conversations really does make your door, quote, always open.
I like that philosophy. So it's not about checking a box. It's not about once a year in a review or even once a quarter in some sort of formal meeting asking for input or feedback. It's about literally all of the time creating the space for that to happen, so that you use the word organically, so that it becomes just more organically part of how you communicate. I really like that.
And I think it makes those scheduled times more productive as well, because you're not talking about things or bringing up things that have been like building. They're more productive meetings because some of that stuff has already been taken care of on its own. And then when you're asking them in those, structured meetings, what do you need from me? How can I help you? It's not just something they like made up to have something written down. It's really thoughtful and good information and they feel like they can tell you, right? You can't say I want feedback and then not hear the feedback.
Right.
You can disagree with it for sure. But as a leader, it also goes back to that, saying it doesn't matter what I intended how someone would receive something. It only matters how they receive it. So I've got to adjust how I'm saying it so they're receiving it in a way that's productive and gets the point across.
Yeah, I like that. So actually kind of getting to the bottom of what they heard from you is key too. So we talked about employees feeling heard and how important it is to value their voice. I actually had a manager recently say, and I like the way she said this, that everybody has a voice, but not everybody has a vote. because sometimes I think it gets in the way of good leaders asking for opinions or input or feedback, because they think, well, what if I ask what they think and then I don't actually go in that direction? I might lose their trust or their confidence. But what I'm hearing from you is that trust and that confidence and just that sharing is happening all the time organically. People are feeling heard. And I would imagine you probably agree with the everybody has a voice, even though everyone does not have a vote. Is that right? Or am I putting words in your mouth?
No, that's absolutely correct. The other difference being when you are transparent and, if for some reason somebody made a suggestion or gave feedback and, we didn't take that suggestion, I would also round back with them and explain to them the why and try to make sure that they saw the bigger picture. And again, we can agree to disagree, but this is the why behind that decision. And yes, we valued what feedback you gave us, and this is where we took that into account, but this is the why we ended up here. And then that way they're not mad about you not taking their feedback,
Right.
but hopefully they understand the bigger picture, because there's different vantage points for every situation, right? And you don't always have the luxury of knowing what all those are, but the more you do know, the better decisions you can make. So having somebody's feedback, whether or not you agree with it or take it, is still really important, and they need to understand that too.
I love that. And just closing the loop, going back and telling people why you made that decision. I bet that makes people feel more informed and even more likely in the future to speak up and continue to share. I
Mm-hmm.
like that. Okay, so back to this Engage report. We learned that only 57% of people do feel fully informed about things that relate to their work. And by the way, the question was not just, do you feel informed about your company? It was specifically, how do you feel informed about the things specifically related to your work that you need to do? Only 57% of people felt that they had all of the information they needed. So I'm coming to you as someone who does this really well. What advice do you have for managers when it comes to information sharing with teams or with individuals? Any best practices you'd recommend?
I mean, my philosophy is to be as transparent as possible. Because when you are, again, it's back to that whole thing of them understanding the bigger picture, and then also being able to help problem solve. If you have all of the information, then you're better equipped to, one, problem solve on your own, or two, make recommendations when you have an issue, like, hey, this is the problem, here's what I'm thinking. It's, in terms of them not having all the information, that is going to happen, unfortunately, from time to time, not because anybody doesn't wants to hold back the information, or at least in our organization or our department. It's purely sometimes a time thing, and with us being so remote too, sometimes things do get lost in transition. Oh, I thought I mentioned that, or but every one of the leaders on our team, we're usually pretty much in lockstep in terms of philosophies and strategies. The details might be different, but the messaging is very similar in terms of the overall goals. So they know that they can go to any one of us and get the information that they need. And because we have created this culture of giving us feedback, they are not shy about saying, hey, why didn't we know about this? Or, hey, I'm hearing XYZ. The other thing about being transparent I have found is that if you're not, then they just make things up, right? So I'd rather people really know, even if it's a difficult conversation, or even if it's something that they don't want to hear or they're not going to like, I would rather them know about it than speculate and make things up, because that is detrimental in other ways too.
That's a really good point. We tend to, just as human beings, we fill the vacuum when there's some sort of void. We start supposing why something's happening or guessing what's going to happen. And sometimes you're right. The truth is better than where people's minds might go. I love the fact that your leaders are all in lockstep, and I really like that your philosophy is transparency, and it sounds like even just potentially over communicating in order to avoid under communicating. I know for me, I'm a very transparent person. If I haven't shared something with someone, it's truly just oversight on my part.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you, I want to create that kind of culture where people will ask, wait a minute, I didn't know what happened.
Well,
So
then
I
they
can
tend
really
to
relate.
trust you more as well. And then the other thing I'll say about sometimes I've heard leaders say, well, ooh, do you trust everybody with that information? Yes, I do, actually. Trust to me is a really big thing. And, when we hire you into the organization, you automatically come in my mind, with 100% trust,
Yeah.
right? And then every day after that, you're either continuing to build that or you're breaking it down, right? Everything we do either builds trust or takes it away. But I do believe that when you come on board with us, you're getting that right up front. 100% I trust you. So if for some reason you don't trust someone on your team, then that's a whole nother conversation that you just probably shouldn't have them on your team, honestly.
That's a good point. Trust is that important, that if there's someone there that you can't trust with important information, you need to question why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I want to kind of stick with the conversation related to trust specifically. One of the things we work really hard to create with our clients is something that we call psychological safety. And that's become quite the buzzword over the years. But it's really about creating that environment where people just trust that they can be themselves, they can speak their mind, they can raise alarm bells when they see a problem, or they can celebrate success when they're excited. They can just bring their whole selves to work and be respected for that. There won't be any sort of repercussions or punishment for being who you are. And so that's, that whole concept of psychological safety, I think, plays into valued voice. If people feel safe, if they feel, comfortable in their position, they're more likely to speak up and more likely to therefore earn information back from their manager. And there are so many examples in history of companies that have experienced significant business setbacks that could have been avoided because they lacked psychological safety. So I want to explore this a little bit with you. The most well-known of those, and certainly the most tragic I can think of, is probably the example of Boeing, where one of their leaders was aware of some issues and yet not comfortable, afraid to ring the alarm bells. So this is something we care a lot about. And I want to ask you, because you do create a place where people, they trust you and they know you trust them. What are some things that managers can do specifically to avoid breaking that trust, to avoid losing that, or creating an environment where people don't feel as though they can speak up or ask questions? What should they avoid?
Yeah, I think the main thing you should avoid is, like, when somebody does speak up, if you disagree and it's in a group setting, that you don't, like, you can nicely disagree without, like, making the person feel like that they spoke up and now you think what they said was dumb. You can, you pull out something that was positive and then you circle back on the rest of it. So I think that's one really important, to make sure that people know that they can speak up without being attacked or feeling like that their feedback was not good or positive or what you wanted to hear. The other thing I would say is, coaching in the moment is so important.
Yeah.
Because you can't let things build, because it's not fair to the employee if you're frustrated with something that they're doing and you don't tell them and they keep on doing it. That's not fair to them. And honestly, you as a leader, it's not fair to you either, because you really need to be able to trust people, and you need to not be checking off like a ding against people. Like, it's more about helping them to grow and be successful so that you don't have to oversee anything. And when you hire somebody, it's very important that you are clear about the expectations and you give them the tools that they need to be successful, but then you're also coaching them, like I said, in the moment when things happen. And if there's a bigger issue among multiple people, don't send something out that to the entire group when you're really talking to a few people, because the people that you're not talking to think you're talking to them, and the people you are talking to think you're not talking
no.
to them. So you solve nothing but getting people riled up that are not the problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I also feel like this is where it gets hard as a leader, right? You like certain people more so than you like others. That's just part of life, right? You are drawn to certain people's personalities more than others, not necessarily but you're drawn to people more so than others sometimes. So what I do sometimes is a little trick on my brain, right? I say, hey, if I was making this decision or talking to X person who I'm drawn to quite a bit, what would my response be? And if I was talking to X person who I'm not really drawn to, what would my response be? And usually it's somewhere in the middle. So when I'm having trouble making a decision, that's kind of what I do for myself to make sure that I'm being fair and consistent. Because I will tell you that being fair and consistent is one of the most important things you can do for the team, because no matter what, if they think that you're going to be fair and consistent regardless of the person, that goes a long way to keeping morale up, to keeping just to keeping a positive culture. If they feel like you're picking favorites, whether you are or you are not, the perception is that you are, that can be detrimental to the culture.
It's a very interesting exercise, sort of challenging yourself to consider how you would do something differently with two different people. I like that. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So we were talking just a moment ago about some tricky communication aspects. I want to look at that from a departmental standpoint and the communication that can happen between departments or even lack of. Only 27% of those surveyed believe that their interdepartmental communication is strong. Most people, 59% of them, felt like it could be better, and 14% said that it is a significant problem. So I know this whole concept of valued voice, it's not just about a manager and a direct report. It also involves valuing the voices, across departments and in every job role. What are some best practices you might recommend to help departments improve here?
I think that that's probably one of the harder things we do as leaders, communicating across departments, because it's kind of like when you work at, if you've ever worked in a nonprofit or you had a board of volunteers, like how you get people to do things that they might not really want to do. I think well, first of all, I'm not the expert on it, but I am working on this. This is one of the things I'm really working hard on, and I feel like I've gotten better on it. But I think it's really about being empathetic, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and then really trying to identify the common goals. And then when you're having those discussions, you're really pointing to whatever that common goal is, so that whatever the outcome is, it makes them achieve something they need to achieve along with something that you need to achieve as well. The other thing I will say is sometimes we, or at least I do, I'm very good about telling my team they did a great job. I don't always do that the same cross-departmentally. So I think it's important because usually what I have found is usually when you're working across departments, you're trying to solve a problem or brainstorm a collaboration, right? So lots of times it's problem solving. So every time they're hearing from you, it's solving a problem. It's not a positive conversation. So just making sure that you take those organic opportunities to say, hey, I saw this. This was really good. I saw what we did on X story. I thought that was awesome. Just making sure that you're giving positive feedback to them too, because everybody likes to hear positive feedback, right? So then when you are having those more difficult conversations, the only time they're hearing from you is not when there's a problem, or not when you're trying to get them to do something you need them to do. So I think that has been helpful. And then the other thing is, a lot of times those cross-department meetings are multiple people in the room or in the Zoom. And not everything is meant to be a big group discussion. So sometimes even having a quick pre-call plan, so to speak, before the big meeting is helpful as well.
Okay, so empathy, that's where you started. I like that. Stepping into someone's shoes. The shared goal was also really interesting. You may be working towards one thing, but the person or the group you're interacting with may be working towards something totally different. So finding that common goal, the constant recognition of good work and praise, so the tough conversations are balanced out. All really, really good advice. So as long as you're on a roll with advice, we just have a few seconds left. So I want to close with, I will get real broad again. In just a sentence or two, maybe a few, what would be the one piece of advice you would give your closest friend if they asked you, what is the one thing I should do to improve culture or engagement at my company? What would you recommend?
It's hard for me to say that in one or two sentences, but I'm going to try really hard. So the first thing is hire good people and make sure they're in the right role, right? That their strengths line up with the correct role. Trust them, be fair and consistent, support them, but also give them coaching in the moment, whether it be good or bad. Though, and I think I already said be fair and consistent, but good people, trust, clear expectations, fair and consistent, and feedback. Ooh, I know that was a lot.
That was good. No, that was a really good list of 5. And it's hard to narrow it down, but it's nice to hear what you think that the big rocks are. So thank you. And thank you just for your time today. I enjoyed talking about culture, talking about people, and valuing voice over coffee today. You shared a lot of good information, some really good best practices and ideas. I know I'll be putting some of these to use. I'm sure our listeners will as well. So for those listening, I'm going to drop Lori's LinkedIn information in the show notes, so you can connect with her on LinkedIn. And then I'm also going to drop in the link to the Engage 2022 report, so you can dive in to any additional information that might interest you. So thank you, Lori, and thank you to all of our listeners. Enjoy that journey to up your culture. Thanks so much for spending time with us on Culture Over Coffee. If you've enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe and join us for every episode. For more helpful information on the topics of company culture and employee engagement, visit us at upyourculture.com.